It's a pleasure to have you with us. And you said you were going to talk for about 15 minutes and then take questions. So please prepare your questions. I'll let you talk. I think the title of your talk is The Role of Europe and the UK in New Zealand, but it might take us somewhere.
It might take us somewhere else.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for your very kind introduction. Reminding me briefly of my master's sort of 20 years ago, brought back the image of sitting in a room not unlike this at sort of 3:30 in the afternoon and hoping the speaker kept it short. So I'd far rather focus on the questions, and I'll speak short. I'll speak for a short period, and then let's have a discussion. I am here to talk about the UK's relationship with the EU, but before I talk about that, I just wanted to start off a bit closer at home, or a bit closer to home, and talk about New Zealand and Europe / the UK, and obviously they are separate entities. An analogy I've heard, and I know that my predecessor often used, is that the EU or Europe, let's call it Europe for now, is often like the wallpaper in the room. We've been there so long that we often blend into the background and aren't necessarily noticed anymore. Now, there's some truth in this, especially when we, Europe, are contrasted against the emerging markets in Asia and the economic opportunities that they bring. People rightly point out that New Zealand's demographics are changing rapidly. An increasing proportion of New Zealand's population have no ancestral connections to the UK and Europe. This has often led to an argument that New Zealand is going through a paradigm shift from Europe to Asia, and that the West faces an inevitable decline. A values debate is often misinterpreted as New Zealand having to make a choice between East and West, between economic prosperity and security, between cultural heritage with Europe and a new future with Asia. Well, this is, as you I'm sure would agree, is quite simplistic, and it implies that New Zealand can only focus on one thing at a time. That instead of naturally evolving into an independent country, you are ready to sever all ties with Europe in exchange for more exports to China. It's a fairly sort of, as I say, simplistic argument. And I don't believe that you have to choose between East and West, between Asia and Europe. Nor do I believe that you have to sacrifice economic prosperity in order to uphold and promote the values that unite New Zealand and Europe. So instead of the wallpaper, I think that the UK and the EU are more like the foundations. You may well forget that they're there, but unlike wallpaper, they're what the very house is built on. And you can't just change the foundations without having a major impact. Let me back up the analogy with some examples. First of all, exports. Who is New Zealand's largest trading partner? I'm talking to a learned room here, so I expect the right answer. On exports. Well, the numbers I've got is quite close. China, taking 19.8% of exports, just edging out Australia, who are second with 19.6%. Third, the EU. Fourth, the US. So although China is New Zealand's largest trading partner, 3 of the top 4 trading partners are outside of Asia, and between them take twice as many of the exports as China. This proves that New Zealand benefits economically from both Europe and Asia, and elsewhere, the Middle East, Latin America, Africa. Exporting to one market doesn't exclude New Zealand from another. Now let's look at investment. Who can tell me the percentage of all investment into New Zealand, how much of it comes from the EU? Ballpark.
20%. 20.
Very good, 18. And from Australia? 34. How about China? 1.1. That shows us 2 things. One, that xenophobic headlines aren't always grounded in fact. And second, that when it comes to investment in New Zealand's economy and the jobs and wealth created by investment, the EU, the US and Australia are the ones who are delivering. That's why I say foundations, not necessarily wallpaper. The anchor of freedom and democracy within both Europe and the world, not an end in itself. This doesn't make us un-European. The fact is that the UK story is not just an island story, it's a continental story. For all our connections to the rest of the world, we have always been a European power and always will be. From the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the defeat of Nazism and the end of the Cold War, Britain has helped write European history, and Europe has helped write ours. Over the years, Britain has made her own unique contribution to Europe. Technological innovations like the World Wide Web and the jet engine. We lead the fight for global free trade and against protectionism. We enjoy cultural icons like Sherlock Holmes and Harry Potter, sporting legends like Andy Murray. We have 4 of the top 6 universities in the world, Oxford, Cambridge, LSE and Imperial, have welcomed students from Europe and around the world for hundreds of years. And across the continent lie hundreds of thousands of British servicemen who gave their lives for Europe's freedom. Alongside, of course, New Zealanders. Contained in all this is the crucial point about Britain's national character and attitude to Europe. Britain is characterised not just by its independence, but by its openness. We've always been a country that reaches out, one that turns its face to the world and leads the charge in the fight for global trade. This is Britain today, as it's always been, independent but open. The UK doesn't want to pull up the drawbridge and retreat from Europe or the world. We want to do the opposite. We have more power and influence, whether implementing sanctions against Iran or Syria, or promoting democracy in Burma, if we act together. And British people take for granted the right to study, work and live in any EU country. The fact is that if you join an organisation like the EU, there are rules, but that doesn't mean that anyone who wants to leave should neglect the benefits of staying. We would have to think very carefully too about the impact on our influence at the top table of international affairs. There's no doubt that we are more powerful in Washington, in Beijing, in Geneva, in Delhi, and yes, in Wellington, because we are a powerful player in the EU. And for all the benefits to the UK, there are also massive benefits to the and for all the benefits to the UK, there are also massive benefits to the EU because the UK is part of it. We are one of Europe's 2 permanent Security Council members, the 6th, and coming up fast on the 5th, largest economy in the world, and the destination for 1 in 5 investments into Europe. It's hard to argue that the EU would not be greatly diminished without Britain in it. And this is in effect the position set out by the Prime Minister in a speech last year. And let me draw from that speech briefly. This was while he was setting out the government's vision for Europe. We believe in a flexible union of free member states who share treaties and institutions and pursue together the ideal of cooperation, to represent and promote the values of European civilization in the world, to advance our shared interests by using our collective power to open markets and to build a strong economic base across the whole of Europe. And we believe in our nations working together to protect the security and diversity of our energy supplies, to tackle climate change and global poverty, to work together against terrorism and organised crime, and to continue to welcome new countries into the European Union. In that speech, he set out 5 principles that should drive reform of the European Union. I'll touch on them briefly, but happy to go into greater detail in questions. They were competitiveness, flexibility, both to help economic growth, but within European structures as well. The fact that power must be able to flow from the European Union to member states, as well as from member states to the European Union. Increased democratic accountability and a greater role for national parliaments. And fairness. Fairness in how member states are treated, both inside and outside the Eurozone. Those were the principles that he set forth in his speech about how we should reform Europe. Because it was clear, and it is clear, that Britain's national interest is best served in a flexible, adaptable, and open European Union, and that such an EU is best with Britain in it. I'll stop there and be very happy to take your questions. Thank you.